My coach denied touching anyone inappropriately. Later, his wife found the videos during their divorce. I was in the middle of testifying when Coach Brennan's lawyer accused me of making everything up for attention. He stood in that courtroom with his expensive suit and silver hair and said I was a troubled teenager with documented mental health issues who'd fabricated assault allegations because Brennan had cut me from the competitive gymnastics team. The jury looked at me with skepticism while I sat in the witness box shaking. Brennan stared at me from the defense table with this calm, almost pitiful expression that made my stomach turn. Like he felt sorry for me. Like I was a confused child who didn't understand reality. His wife Amanda sat in the gallery behind him looking exhausted and angry. Not at him, though. At me. At the other 3 girls who'd also come forward with accusations. At the prosecution for destroying her family over what she insisted were lies. The trial lasted 6 weeks and ended with Brennan walking free. Not guilty on all charges. Insufficient evidence. My word against his. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When the verdict was read, Brennan's supporters in the courtroom actually cheered. My parents sat silent in their seats while I cried. That was 3 years ago when I was 16 years old. Today I'm 19 and received a phone call that changed everything. Amanda Brennan had filed for divorce and found something during the proceedings. Videos. Dozens of them. Hidden in an encrypted folder on Brennan's laptop that his lawyer had to turn over during discovery. Videos of me. Of the other girls who'd testified. Of girls we didn't even know about. All the proof we'd needed 3 years ago. All the evidence that would have prevented years of people calling us liars. Amanda's lawyer contacted the district attorney's office yesterday. New charges were being filed. The videos were being analyzed. Everything was starting again. I need to go back to the beginning to explain how we got here. How a trusted coach at Summit Gymnastics Academy in our small Pennsylvania town managed to assault at least 14 girls over 8 years while everyone looked the other way. How the system failed us repeatedly. How we fought back and lost and then finally won in the most unexpected way possible. I was 14 when Brennan first approached my parents about private training sessions. I'd been competing on the junior team for 2 years with decent results but nothing spectacular. He told my mother and father I had natural talent that was being wasted in group classes. That with proper one-on-one coaching, I could potentially qualify for elite-level competitions, maybe even college scholarships. My parents were thrilled. My older brother had gotten football scholarships, but I'd never been particularly good at anything. Gymnastics was my only chance to be special, to make my family proud, to have something that was mine. Brennan seemed like the answer to everything. He'd coached at the national level before moving here. Had recommendation letters from former Olympic team members. Parents in our gym practically worshipped him. He volunteered extra hours, showed up early to open the facility, stayed late to work with kids who needed help. He organized fundraisers and drove athletes to competitions when their parents couldn't. He was beloved, trusted, the kind of coach everyone wanted for their daughters. The private sessions started innocently. 3 evenings per week after regular practice ended. He'd work with me on specific skills, conditioning, flexibility, form corrections, his hands on me constantly because that's what gymnastics coaching requires. Spotting athletes through difficult moves, supporting their weight, adjusting body positioning. It's intimate by nature, which makes it perfect cover for predators. The touching began changing around month 3. His hands lingering longer than necessary during spots, moving to places that didn't need adjustment, sliding down my hips during vault practice, pressing against my chest during floor work, supposedly checking my core engagement. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. Brennan never said anything inappropriate, never made obvious moves. He talked about technique and competition strategy and my future. Made me feel like everything he did was professional, scientific, necessary for elite training. I was 14 and didn't trust my own instincts, didn't have language for what was happening. The sessions moved later into evenings when the gym was empty. Just us alone in that huge building with dim lighting. He'd have me change into tighter leotards he provided. Said judges at elite competitions looked for clean lines. That excess fabric hid technical flaws. He set up a video camera on a tripod near the training areas. Said recording would help me analyze my form. That serious athletes studied themselves constantly. The camera's red light stayed on during everything. During stretches where he pressed his full body weight against mine. During strength training where his hands moved across my stomach and chest. During balance work where he stood behind me with his grip moving lower than proper spotting required. I learned to disappear mentally during sessions. To focus only on pointing toes and keeping form tight. To separate my mind from what was happening to my body. When I got home, my mother would ask if I was okay. I'd say practice was intense. She'd make protein shakes and tell me hard work paid off. That Brennan was pushing me because he saw real talent. I wanted to tell her the truth but was terrified she wouldn't believe me. That she'd think I was ungrateful. That I'd lose my only chance at a gymnastics future. I started noticing other girls having private sessions with Brennan too. Melissa Crawford was 15 and one of our best gymnasts. She'd been training privately with him for over a year. I tried talking to her during practice breaks, but she avoided everyone, kept her head down, moved mechanically through routines. During a water break, I asked quietly how her private coaching was going. She stared at her bottle and said, "Fine," voice completely flat. I asked if Brennan ever made her uncomfortable. She looked at me with this empty expression and said he was helping her get college scholarships, that she'd be stupid to complain about someone investing time in her future, that I should focus on my own training instead of asking weird questions. She walked away, but I saw her hands shaking, saw her flinch when Brennan called her over. I wasn't imagining things. Something was happening to her too. Maybe to others. But none of us were talking. We were all trapped separately, isolated and confused and afraid. Everything escalated the night Brennan locked the gym door behind me. I heard the deadbolt click and my stomach dropped. He'd never locked it during our sessions before. He walked past me saying we had important work to do, that my competition season was approaching and I was making fundamental mistakes. His voice sounded different, harder. I followed him while my brain screamed to leave, but I was 14 and conditioned to obey authority, especially authority my parents trusted completely. He had me start floor exercises while he watched from near the camera. I kept messing up skills I'd landed perfectly before. My body wouldn't cooperate, landing off center. He told me to sit on the mat, said we needed to discuss my commitment level. I sat far away and pulled my knees to my chest. He moved closer and asked if something was bothering me, if I had problems at home or school. I shook my head. He lifted my chin so I had to look at him, said our relationship required complete trust, that everything he did was designed to make me better. His hand moved from my face to my shoulder, then lower. I tried pulling away, but he grabbed my wrist firmly, told me to relax, that I was being childish, that if I couldn't handle advanced training, maybe I wasn't cut out for competitive gymnastics. What happened next I've blocked out partially, my brain protecting itself from full memory. I remember trying to stand and him pushing me down, saying I wanted to leave and him pointing at the locked door. Him explaining this was part of serious athletic training, that Olympic coaches worked with athletes this way, that my immaturity was holding me back. I remember the camera's red light still recording, thinking maybe that meant nothing too bad could happen, because there was evidence. I was so stupid about how predators think. When he unlocked the door 90 minutes later, I grabbed my bag and ran to my mother's car. She asked why I looked upset. I said bad training session, that I kept messing up. She said that was normal, that every athlete had difficult practices. I wanted to scream, wanted to tell her everything, but I was terrified she wouldn't believe me, that she'd side with Brennan because adults always sided with other adults over kids. I stayed silent, took a scalding shower until the water ran cold, scrubbed my skin raw, laid in bed until dawn. When my alarm went off, I felt like a different person, like something fundamental had broken inside me. I stayed home sick that day, and the next, the entire following week. My mother took me to the doctor, worried I'd caught something serious. The doctor found nothing physically wrong, suggested anxiety or depression, prescribed medication, and recommended therapy. My mother seemed relieved to have a medical explanation that didn't require deeper investigation. I started seeing the therapist my parents found, but I couldn't tell her the real reason I felt like drowning. I stopped going to gymnastics completely, told my parents I didn't want to compete anymore. They were devastated and confused, asked if something had happened. I said I just wasn't good enough, that I'd realized gymnastics wasn't my future. My mother cried. My father said I was throwing away years of work and money. They called Brennan to ask what was wrong. He told them I'd been struggling mentally, that the pressure of elite training was too much for me, that he'd tried to help but I'd shut down. He sounded so concerned, so genuinely caring. My parents believed him completely. They tried forcing me back to practice. I had a panic attack in the car outside the gym, started hyperventilating and couldn't breathe. My mother had to drive me home. After that, they stopped pushing, let me quit. But they were disappointed. I heard them talking late at night about how I'd given up, how I lacked discipline and mental toughness, how I'd let Coach Brennan down after everything he'd done for me. The guilt was suffocating. I started the medication and therapy, went to school, avoided everyone. My grades dropped. I stopped hanging out with friends, spent most time alone in my room. The therapist kept asking about school stress and social problems. I gave vague answers. She taught me breathing exercises for anxiety. None of it helped because we weren't addressing the real problem. Months passed. I slowly learned to function again, to go through motions of normal life while feeling dead inside. I saw Brennan sometimes around town, at restaurants with his wife, at community events. He'd smile and wave, ask my parents how I was doing, express disappointment I'd quit gymnastics. Everyone still loved him, still trusted him. I felt invisible and crazy, like I'd imagined everything. Then during my sophomore year of high school, another girl came forward. Her name was Julie Patterson. She was 13 and had been training privately with Brennan for 6 months. She told her parents he'd touched her inappropriately. They went straight to police. The investigation started quietly at first. Detectives interviewed Julie, examined the gym, talked to other families. Word spread quickly through our small town. Parents were divided. Some believed Julie immediately and pulled their daughters from Summit Gymnastics. Others insisted she was lying, that Brennan would never do something like that the girl must be confused or seeking attention. My parents fell into the second category. They said Julie was making false accusations against a good man, that her family was probably trying to sue for money. When detectives contacted me asking if I'd experienced anything inappropriate with Brennan, my parents were furious I was being dragged into it. They told me to tell the truth, that Brennan had never done anything wrong. I sat across from the detective in our living room with my parents on either side of me. The detective asked if Brennan had ever touched me inappropriately during training. I looked at my mother, at my father, at their expectant faces. I said no. Said he'd been a good coach who'd tried to help me, that I quit because I couldn't handle the pressure. The detective looked at me for a long moment, asked if I was sure. I nodded. He gave me his card anyway. Said to call if I remembered anything. After he left, my mother hugged me. Said she was proud I'd told the truth, that I'd done the right thing protecting an innocent man. I went to my room and cried until I couldn't breathe. I'd just betrayed Julie, betrayed myself. But I couldn't face my parents' disappointment. Couldn't survive them not believing me after I'd explicitly told the truth. Over the following weeks, 2 more girls came forward. Melissa Crawford was one of them. The other was a girl named Ashley who'd graduated the year before. All 3 described similar experiences. Private training sessions that became increasingly inappropriate. Touching that escalated. Brennan making them feel like it was normal, like elite training required it. Their testimonies were remarkably consistent. But Brennan denied everything, said he'd never touched anyone inappropriately, that these were troubled girls making coordinated false accusations. His lawyer was expensive and aggressive, started investigating the girls' backgrounds, found that Julie had anxiety medication, that Melissa had failed classes, that Ashley had been in therapy, used all of it to paint them as unreliable witnesses. The community rallied around Brennan. Parents organized fundraisers for his legal defense. Letters to the editor praised his character. The girls who'd accused him were harassed at school, called liars, threatened. Julie's family had to move to a different town because the bullying got so bad. I watched everything from a distance, hating myself. The detective called me twice more, said he knew there were probably other victims, that my testimony could help. I said I didn't have anything to add. He told me I wasn't alone, that trauma made people protect themselves in complicated ways, that speaking up was terrifying but necessary. I thanked him and hung up. The case went to trial when I was 16. I followed every news report obsessively. The prosecution presented the 3 girls' testimonies, medical experts on grooming behavior, other coaches who testified about proper boundaries. But Brennan's defense was strong. They argued the girls had coordinated their stories, that there was no physical evidence, no videos or photos, no witnesses, just accusations from teenagers against a respected coach. They brought in character witnesses, parents who swore Brennan was trustworthy, former athletes who said he'd never been inappropriate with them. His wife Amanda testified that her husband was a good man, that these girls were lying, that their marriage was strong and happy, that she'd never seen anything concerning. The defense called me as a witness. I hadn't expected it. They subpoenaed me to testify. I sat in that courtroom shaking while Brennan's lawyer asked if Brennan had ever acted inappropriately with me. I said no. He asked if I'd ever felt uncomfortable during private training. I said no. He asked why I'd quit gymnastics if Brennan was such a good coach. I said I couldn't handle the competitive pressure. Every word felt like swallowing glass. The 3 girls who'd accused Brennan were in the courtroom. I couldn't look at them. Couldn't face what I was doing. But I couldn't tell the truth either. Couldn't survive the fallout. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, found Brennan not guilty on all charges, insufficient evidence, reasonable doubt. When the verdict was read, his supporters cheered. The 3 girls cried. My parents seemed vindicated. See? They'd been right all along. Brennan was innocent. Those girls had lied. I left the courtroom and threw up in the bathroom. Stayed there for 20 minutes while my mother knocked asking if I was okay. That night, I cut myself for the first time. Just small cuts on my thigh where no one would see. The physical pain felt better than the emotional agony. Gave me something to focus on. Something I could control. I started doing it regularly. My therapist eventually noticed scars during a session where I'd worn shorts. She asked about them gently. I said I didn't know why I did it. She increased my medication dosage, added a psychiatrist to my treatment team. My parents were told I was self-harming due to depression and anxiety. They seemed confused about where it came from. I'd had such a normal childhood. Nothing traumatic had happened to me. The psychiatrist diagnosed me with depression and prescribed more medication. I took the pills dutifully. They made everything feel muted and distant, which was better than feeling anything real. Julie's family sued Brennan civilly after the criminal trial ended. That case lasted 2 years and also went nowhere. Brennan's lawyers were too good, the evidence too thin, just the girl's words against his. The case was dismissed. By then, all 3 girls had moved away, started over in different places. I stayed in town and finished high school, barely graduated, didn't apply to colleges, worked at a coffee shop and lived with my parents, existed more than lived. Everyone had moved on from the accusations. Brennan continued coaching at Summit Gymnastics. Parents still brought their daughters to him. He'd survived the scandal with his reputation mostly intact. Some people still believed the girls, but most had decided it was a misunderstanding. That teenage girls were dramatic and confused. That a good man had been nearly destroyed by false accusations. I'd see him sometimes. He never acknowledged me. Just went about his life. I wondered how many other girls he was hurting. How many were trapped in private sessions too afraid to speak up. I thought about calling the detective. About finally telling the truth. But 3 years had passed. The case was closed. What difference would my testimony make now? Then last week I got a phone call from a lawyer I didn't know. Her name was Catherine Wells, and she represented Amanda Brennan in divorce proceedings against her husband. She asked if I'd be willing to speak with her about my experiences with Brennan. I asked why. She said Amanda had found something during the divorce discovery process, that she couldn't give me details, but it was important. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop downtown. Catherine was in her 50s with sharp eyes and an efficient manner. She ordered tea and got straight to the point. Amanda had filed for divorce 6 months ago. The marriage had been deteriorating for years. She'd finally had enough of Brennan's emotional abuse and controlling behavior. During the discovery phase, Amanda's lawyers had subpoenaed Brennan's electronics, his laptop, phone, external hard drives. Everything had to be turned over as part of determining assets and grounds for divorce. The tech forensics team had found an encrypted folder on Brennan's laptop. Took them weeks to crack the password. Inside were videos, hundreds of them, spanning 8 years, videos of private training sessions with girls from Summit Gymnastics, videos that showed exactly what he'd been doing. My stomach dropped. I asked if I was in those videos. Catherine nodded. She said my sessions had been recorded. So had Melissa's, Julie's, Ashley's. At least 10 other girls they'd identified so far. The videos showed everything, the inappropriate touching, the escalation, everything we'd described in our accusations that no one had believed. Everything Brennan had denied under oath. I started crying right there in the coffee shop. Catherine handed me tissues and waited patiently. She explained that the videos constituted new evidence, that the district attorney's office was reviewing them now, that new criminal charges would almost certainly be filed, that this time there was undeniable proof. She asked if I'd be willing to testify again, to tell the truth this time about what had happened to me. I said yes immediately. I'd been carrying the guilt of my lies for 3 years. This was my chance to make it right. Catherine explained that Amanda had been devastated by the discovery, that she'd truly believed her husband was innocent, that the accusations had been lies meant to destroy him. She'd stood by him through the trial, defended him to everyone, testified on his behalf. Finding the videos had shattered her entire reality. Everything she'd believed about her marriage and her husband was false. She'd been living with a predator, defending a monster. The betrayal went beyond just the assault of these girls. Brennan had lied to Amanda for 8 years, made her complicit in protecting him, used her testimony and support to evade justice. She was horrified and furious. Catherine said Amanda wanted to cooperate fully with the new prosecution, that she'd testify about finding the videos, about how Brennan had hidden them, about lies he'd told her. I asked what would happen to the videos as evidence. Catherine said they'd be analyzed by forensic specialists, that only necessary portions would be used in court, that the girls' privacy would be protected as much as possible. But yes, the videos would be part of the evidence. I'd have to face what was on them. I nodded. I'd do whatever was necessary. Over the next few days, Catherine connected me with the district attorney's office. I met with the same detective who'd interviewed me years ago. He remembered me. Didn't judge me for lying before. Said he understood why I'd been too afraid to tell the truth. That trauma responses were complicated. That what mattered was I was ready now. I gave a full statement this time. Described every private session I remembered. The escalation of touching. The locked door. The camera recording everything. The detective took detailed notes. Told me I was brave. That my testimony combined with the video evidence would ensure Brennan finally faced justice. He said they were contacting all the girls who appeared in the videos. That so far everyone was willing to participate in the new prosecution. That this case was going to be airtight. Brennan was arrested 4 days later. The news spread through town immediately. People were shocked. How could this be happening again? Hadn't he been proven innocent? The story broke nationally when details about the videos emerged. A gymnastics coach who'd been acquitted of assault charges years ago was now facing new prosecution because his wife had found video evidence during their divorce. Media descended on our small town. Reporters wanted interviews with the victims, with Amanda, with anyone connected to the case. I declined all interview requests. So did most of the other girls. But Julie agreed to speak. She did a television interview where she talked about how devastating it had been to tell the truth and not be believed, how she'd been harassed and forced to move, how she'd struggled with depression and PTSD, how finding out there was video proof all along made her furious. She said Brennan had recorded his own crimes, that he'd kept the videos as trophies, that his arrogance and sickness had finally caught up with him. The interview went viral. Suddenly everyone was talking about our case, about how the justice system had failed, about how a predator had hidden in plain sight, about how his wife's divorce had accidentally exposed the truth. Public opinion shifted dramatically. The people who'd defended Brennan were mortified. Parents who'd kept their daughters in his program pulled them immediately. Summit Gymnastics fired him and issued public apologies. The organization that had certified him revoked his coaching credentials. Everyone who'd called us liars was suddenly silent. The second trial was scheduled for 6 months after Brennan's arrest. The prosecution had time to build an overwhelming case. They had the videos as physical evidence. They had testimony from 14 girls who appeared in those videos. They had Amanda testifying about how she'd found them, and what Brennan had told her about his coaching methods. They had forensic specialists analyzing the footage. They had everything they'd lacked the first time. Brennan's new legal team tried every tactic to get the video evidence suppressed, argued it was obtained illegally, that it was prejudicial, that it violated privacy rights. Every motion was denied. The videos were coming in. The trial date approached, and I prepared myself mentally. I met with the other victims before the trial started. We gathered at the prosecutor's office for a group meeting. I'd never met most of them. We'd all been isolated in our own experiences. There was Julie, who I recognized from news coverage, Melissa, who I'd known from team practice, Ashley, who'd graduated before I started, 10 other girls ranging from ages 17 to 24. We sat in a conference room and shared our stories. Heard the similarities, the same grooming tactics, the same escalation patterns, the same camera recording everything, the same betrayal and isolation. Many had struggled like me. Depression, anxiety, self-harm, eating disorders, relationship problems. The trauma had marked all of us permanently. But we were together now, united, ready to face Brennan in court with truth and evidence. The prosecutor told us the case was solid, that the videos showed clear criminal behavior, that medical experts would testify about trauma and grooming, that Amanda's testimony about finding the evidence would be powerful. He said we'd each testify about our individual experiences, that we should expect aggressive cross-examination, but to remember we were telling the truth this time, that the jury would see the videos, that justice was finally within reach. The trial began on a cold Monday in November. The courthouse was packed. Media cameras lined the steps outside. Security was heavy because of death threats Brennan had received. I sat in the witness waiting room with the other girls. We held hands and supported each other. When my name was called, I walked into that courtroom with my head up. Brennan sat at the defense table looking smaller than I remembered, defeated. His wife wasn't there this time. She was testifying for the prosecution. I took the oath and sat in the witness box. The prosecutor asked me to state my name and age, then asked me to tell the jury about my experiences with Brennan. I took a deep breath and started talking. Told them everything. About the private training sessions, the gradual boundary violations, the locked door, the camera. Every detail I'd hidden 3 years ago came out now. My voice shook, but I kept going. The prosecutor showed me stills from the videos, asked me to confirm those images were from my sessions with Brennan. I looked at them and nodded. Yes, that was me at 14 years old. Yes, that was Brennan's hands on my body. Yes, that was the gymnastics training room. The images made me sick, but I didn't look away. The jury needed to see my face as I confirmed everything. Brennan's lawyer cross-examined me aggressively, asked why I'd lied during the first trial. I said I was 16 and terrified, that I couldn't face my parents not believing me, that I'd made a horrible mistake I'd regretted every day since. He asked if I was now just following what the other girls had said, coordinating stories again. I said no. I was finally telling the truth that had been recorded on video all along. He tried to poke holes in my timeline, in specific details, but the videos backed up everything I said. There was no reasonable doubt this time. After 2 hours of testimony, I was dismissed. I left the witness box shaking but relieved. I'd finally told the truth publicly. Finally done what I should have done 3 years ago. The other victims testified over the following days. Each story was similar. Each girl had been targeted during vulnerable moments. Each had been groomed carefully. Each had been recorded without fully understanding why. The videos were played for the jury. Not in full, but enough to show clear patterns of assault. Jurors looked disturbed. Several cried. One asked to be excused and was replaced by an alternate. The evidence was overwhelming. Amanda Brennan testified on day 8 of the trial. She looked exhausted and angry. The prosecutor asked her to describe finding the videos. She explained that during divorce discovery, her lawyers had obtained Brennan's laptop, that forensics had found the encrypted folder, that when they'd opened it, she'd seen thumbnails of young girls in gymnastics attire, that she'd immediately reported it to police. She said she'd felt horrified and betrayed, that she'd defended her husband during the first trial because she'd truly believed he was innocent, that finding proof of his guilt had destroyed everything she'd thought she knew about her marriage and her life. The defense tried to discredit Amanda, suggested she was lying as revenge for the divorce, that she'd planted the evidence, that she was colluding with the prosecution. Amanda's voice got stronger. She said her husband was a predator who'd lied to her for 8 years, that he'd used her trust and testimony to escape justice, that she hoped he'd spend the rest of his life in prison for what he'd done to these girls. The defense had no effective response. The videos existed. The girls' testimonies were consistent. The forensic evidence was undeniable. Brennan didn't testify in his own defense. His lawyers rested their case quickly. Closing arguments were scheduled for the following day. The prosecutor's closing argument was powerful. He walked the jury through the evidence systematically, showed the pattern of grooming, played key portions of the videos, reminded them that 14 separate victims had described identical experiences, that this wasn't about misunderstandings or false accusations, that the defendant had recorded his own crimes and kept them hidden for years, that only his wife's divorce had accidentally brought the truth to light, that justice had been delayed but would not be denied. The defense's closing argument was weak. They argued that the videos were ambiguous, that coaching required touching, that the defendant's intentions had been misunderstood, that his reputation and career had already been destroyed by accusations. The argument fell flat. The jury looked unconvinced. Deliberations began the next morning. I waited with the other victims in a conference room at the prosecutor's office. We tried to distract ourselves with conversation and phones but couldn't focus on anything else. This was it. Everything came down to 12 people reviewing the evidence and making a decision. After 6 hours, the jury reached a verdict. We rushed to the courthouse. The gallery was packed. Amanda sat on the prosecution side. Brennan's family sat on the defense side, looking grim. The jury filed in. None of them looked at Brennan, which I'd heard was usually a bad sign for defendants. The judge asked the jury foreman if they'd reached a verdict. He said yes. Guilty on all charges. 38 counts of sexual assault of a minor. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered. Others gasped. Brennan's mother sobbed. Julie grabbed my hand and squeezed hard. We'd won. The judge ordered Brennan remanded into custody immediately. Bailiffs handcuffed him right there. He was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs for the first time. His face was blank, shocked. He'd actually believed he'd get away with it again. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. The prosecutor told us that with 38 convictions, Brennan was looking at decades in prison, that he'd likely die there, that he'd never hurt another child. Outside the courthouse, we faced cameras and reporters. Julie spoke for all of us. She said justice had finally been served, that no child should ever have to go through what we'd experienced, that the system had failed us initially, but had ultimately worked, that other victims of abuse should keep speaking up even when they weren't believed the first time. That truth eventually came out. I stood beside her with the other survivors. We held hands, presented a united front. We'd survived something horrible. We'd fought back. We'd won. Sentencing day arrived in January. The judge allowed victim impact statements. All 14 of us spoke. We described the lasting damage Brennan had caused, the depression, anxiety, PTSD, trust issues, relationship problems, the years of therapy, the suicide attempts some of us had survived, the ways he'd stolen our childhoods and innocence. The judge listened to every statement. Then he addressed Brennan directly, said he'd abused his position of trust in the most despicable way possible, that he'd preyed on vulnerable children, that he'd shown no remorse, that he'd lied under oath in the first trial, that he'd manipulated his own wife into defending him. The judge sentenced him to 40 years in prison without possibility of parole. Brennan would be 82 when eligible for release, effectively a life sentence. The courtroom was silent as bailiffs led him away. He didn't look back at anyone, just shuffled out in his orange jumpsuit and chains. After the sentencing, we gathered outside the courthouse one final time. Media wanted statements. We kept them brief. We'd gotten justice. We were moving forward with our lives. We thanked Amanda Brennan for having the courage to come forward with the evidence even though it destroyed her marriage and life as she knew it. She released a statement through her lawyer saying she hoped we could all heal, that she was profoundly sorry for not seeing the truth sooner, that she'd spend the rest of her life trying to make amends. The story stayed in the news for several more weeks. Think pieces about how predators hide in plain sight, about institutional failures, about believing victims, about the importance of thorough investigations. Summit Gymnastics shut down permanently. Too many families refused to ever return. The building was sold and converted to office space. Other coaches from the program were investigated, but no additional criminal behavior was found. The USA Gymnastics Organization updated their policies on coach-athlete interactions, mandated cameras in all training areas, required multiple coaches present during private sessions. Background checks became more thorough. Some good came from our trauma. My relationship with my parents slowly improved after the second trial. They apologized for not believing me initially, for pressuring me to defend Brennan, for not seeing what was happening right in front of them. It took time, but we rebuilt trust. I'm in college now studying social work. Want to help other survivors navigate the systems that failed me? Several of the other victims have similar goals. We stay in touch, support each other. We're not defined by what happened to us, but we're not pretending it didn't happen either. Julie finished her degree and works at a nonprofit for assault survivors. Melissa became a lawyer specializing in victims' rights. Ashley started a foundation that provides free counseling for athletes who've experienced abuse. We took our pain and trauma and turned it into purpose. Amanda Brennan moved to a different state and changed her name. Started over completely. She sends cards sometimes on the anniversary of Brennan's conviction. Thanks us for forcing the truth into the light even though it destroyed everything she'd known. Says finding those videos was the worst and best thing that ever happened to her. Brennan is in a maximum security prison 3 hours from here. I've never visited and never will. Sometimes I think about him sitting in that cell knowing he'll die there, knowing his victims won the end, knowing his own arrogance in keeping those videos led to his downfall. He thought he was untouchable, that he was too smart to get caught, that his reputation and his wife's support made him invincible. He was wrong. The case changed our town permanently. People are more cautious now, more willing to believe children who report abuse, more aware that predators don't look like monsters. They look like beloved coaches and trusted teachers and helpful neighbors. They hide behind credentials and reputations and community standing, but they leave evidence. They make mistakes. And eventually, the truth surfaces. I still have hard days. Therapy continues. The trauma doesn't just disappear because justice was served, but I'm no longer consumed by guilt and shame. I told the truth. I helped put a predator away. I potentially saved future victims. 3 years ago, I sat in a courtroom and lied to protect myself and my parents' feelings. Last year, I sat in a courtroom and told the truth despite everything. That second time made all the difference. Not just for me, but for all 14 of us who survived Brennan. And for all the girls who'll never be his victims because his wife found those videos during their divorce and chose to do the right thing even though it cost her everything. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.